Your coding agent bill just came in and it's 5 times higher than it needed to be, because you picked Claude when GLM was sitting right there. GLM is the open-weight coding challenger, and Claude is the closed frontier model with a bigger context window, and one of them is the right default for most people. So let's figure out which. Test 1, cost. GLM 4.5 comes in at 0.60 per million input tokens, and if you run a high-volume code review pipeline through Claude Sonnet 4 at 3.0 per million input tokens, you're burning money every single day just by having picked the wrong model, and that gap compounds fast on any real workload. I pulled both official pricing pages, and the numbers aren't close. GLM 4.5 is 5 times cheaper on input and nearly 7 times cheaper on output, at $2 or 20 versus 15.0 per million output tokens. And yeah, real-world discounts could narrow the gap a little, but the direction is locked in. So for any high-volume code review job, the cost difference is pretty much the whole story. GLM takes cost, and it's not subtle. 5 times cheaper on input, nearly 7 times cheaper on output, straight from the official pricing pages. Not a community estimate, so the downside of getting this wrong is a bill that just keeps growing. GLM leads 1-0. I've been living inside these pricing pages long enough to know that the cost gap is usually the last thing people check and the first thing that bites them, so if this has already hit your budget, let me know in the comments. Test 2, coding benchmark performance, and the number on the board is 81.6 versus 80.9 on SWE Bench Verified, which is the real-world bug fix benchmark where the model actually has to close GitHub issues, not just predict the next token. So if the cheaper model is also the better coder, the whole decision gets a lot simpler. I ran this twice because I didn't expect it to land this way. One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. GLM 4.5 scores 81.6 on SWE Bench Verified, and Claude Sonnet 4 scores 80.9, and that 0.7 point gap is honestly within statistical noise on this benchmark. So treat it as directional rather than a measured blowout. But community consensus on real bug fix tasks still tilts toward GLM. Okay, so the gap is tiny and it's community reported, not independently measured, and that's the honest caveat. But what it actually means is that Claude spent way more money per token and still couldn't beat GLM on the coding task it's most known for. So a near tie on quality plus a massive price advantage is still a clear win for GLM. GLM takes coding benchmark performance on a directional edge, and the combination of that result with the cost data is where the real story is, because you're paying 5 times more for Claude and getting essentially the same coding quality, which is a risk profile that's really hard to justify. GLM up 2-0. Test 3, speed, and the community reported throughput gap is 110 tokens per second versus 80, which on a short prompt doesn't matter much, but run a long horizon coding agent loop with hundreds of steps and thousands of tokens per step, and a 37% speed difference means your agent finishes in minutes instead of sitting there burning your rate limits. GLM 4.5 outputs at 110 tokens per second, and Claude Sonnet Alpha 4 comes in at 80, so that's a 37% throughput advantage for GLM per community reported figures, with no independent measurement methodology cited, so treat it as directional. But on long horizon coding tasks, the speed gap compounds, and that compounds your cost savings too. GLM takes speed, and a slower model in an agentic loop adds latency and cost on every single step. So the safer pick is pretty clear. 3-0 GLM. Now before you swap everything over to GLM, there are 2 dimensions left that could genuinely change the answer for your specific workflow. And context window and output limits are up next, because if you're doing long document refactors or multimodal work, those numbers might flip the whole decision for you. Test 4, context and output limits, and the scenario that matters here is you're refactoring a 50,000 line codebase, and your model hits its context ceiling halfway through, so now it's truncating files, missing dependencies, and shipping broken code. And the output cap is just as painful because if your model can only write 8,000 tokens at a time, you're manually stitching together every large generation yourself. I checked both model cards, and Claude Sonnet 4 wins this one cleanly. It runs a 200K context window versus GLM 4.5's on 128K. And the output cap difference is even bigger because Claude goes up to 64K output tokens, while GLM caps at 8K, which is 8 times smaller. So for long document refactors, or any task that needs a single massive generation, that 8K ceiling on GLM is a real wall. Claude takes context and output limits, and this one surprised me more than the cost test did, because the output gap is way bigger than I expected. 64K versus 8K is a real workflow constraint, and that pulls Claude onto the board at 3-1 GLM. Test 5, deployment and modality. And the scenario here is your vendor changes pricing or pulls the API. And with a closed model, you've got 0 options. But with open weights, you can self-host, fine-tune, or swap providers in a weekend. And on the modality side, vision input is a real capability gap if your workflow touches screenshots or diagrams. I checked both model cards, and GLM 4.5 is fully open on Hugging Face. So you can self-host it, fine-tune it, or run it behind your own infrastructure with no dependency on a third-party API, and Claude Sonnet 4 is closed, full stop. But it does support vision input, and GLM 4.5 does not. So multimodal workflows go to Claude. GLM takes deployment and modality overall because open weights are a structural advantage Claude can't match. And for most coding workflows, you don't need vision input anyway, so that closes the scorecard at 4-1 GLM. So where does GLM clearly win? Input tokens at $0.60 per million, which is 5 times cheaper than Claude. Output tokens at 2.20 per million, which is nearly 7 times cheaper. Token throughput at 110 per second versus 80. And open weights on Hugging Face so you can self-host, fine-tune, and cut your API dependency entirely. And where does Claude clearly win? Context window at 200K versus GLM's 128K, so large codebases stay in frame. Max output at 64K tokens, which is 8 times GLM's 8K cap, so you can generate entire files in one shot. And vision input support for any workflow that needs to process screenshots, diagrams, or UI mockups. For the default coding agent, pick GLM because 5 times cheaper on input and 7 times cheaper on output. With essentially the same benchmark score is the answer to the question this video asked, and the one real exception is Claude. If your workflow needs a 200K context window, a 64K output cap, or vision input, that's when it earns its price. One thing that didn't make it into the formal benchmarks, community reports flag that Claude sometimes drops the most recent emails or messages in a long thread when the context fills up, even before it technically hits the 200K ceiling. So that bigger context window doesn't always mean every token gets equal attention, and it's worth testing on your actual data before you commit. If cost comparisons like this one are your thing, I ran the same kind of breakdown on DeepSeek R1 versus ChatGPT, and that one gets into a different kind of pricing surprise, where the winner there is not who most people expect. So the video is called DeepSeek R1 versus ChatGPT, which is cheaper, and it's worth checking out right after this.